project can look very daunting, but that is because the project panel area hasn't been organized properly. I wouldn't normally do this. However, the turnaround time on this project was really fast. I was just cutting up and trying to piece things together as quick as possible. This is not something I'd advise for you to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to rebuild this project, and I'm going to show you how you should actually organize your files. So the very first thing we're going to do is open a new project, and to do this, I'm just going to go and hit File, New Project. So you should all be familiar with this interface. I'm just going to quickly name the project TRW Tate Add. I'm not going to bring anything into the project, so no need to create a new bin or a new sequence. I've chosen the destination that I'm going to save this project in, which is named TRW Tate Add project file. And down here in the bottom right hand side, I'm going to click Create. So as you can see in the project panel, I have both projects open. This timeline or sequence is from the previous project, the original project, and I actually saved the project name as 1. I'm just going to close this sequence down so we start afresh. Now there's two ways of doing this. Either you can organize your files within the project panel, which requires you to create new bins. Over in the bottom right hand corner of the project panel, you'll see a folder icon, which is new bin. Click that, and then from there you can rename this to video, and you can just do the same and perhaps create a few files that you know you're going to be using. Then what we can do is double click on the blank area in the project panel and select a few videos that we want to use, import them, highlight them, and then drag them into the bin file. So for these, they'd go under video, and there you have it. You have your videos within that file, and then you'll do the same for sound and overlays. Sequences we will discuss very shortly. That's one method. However, the preferred and better method, in my personal opinion, is to already have your files organized within your operating system. So what do I mean by this? If I head over to my Finder or my documents, you can see that I've already organized all my assets into folders. So within the video folder, I've got all the videos I need, overlays, something we will discuss shortly, and then audio. I can then highlight these and drag them into my project panel. And there you have it. You already have all the files organized in the bins that you want them. I'll just quickly go ahead and create a bin for sequences. Now within the project panel, you can have different view settings. So down in the bottom right hand corner, we've currently got everything on list view. You can move this to icon view, and you can move this into freeform. I prefer to use icon view. However, freeform can come in handy. So for example, if we was to go into our video bin file, you can see we've got all our videos stacked. And in fact, whilst we're doing this, I'm just going to quickly head over to the workspaces, and I'm going to switch this to assembly. Now I can see things a lot more clearly. If I go back into the video section, I can see all my video assets. I've currently got everything on the freeform view. So let's just say I want to group footage that is just Tate related. I can essentially drag these wherever I want and group them together. Let's just say that's all Tate style footage, and then different footage that is not necessarily related to Tate. So we've got Mike Tyson, the 300 movie. There's a clip here from Creed, which I can put up there. You get the idea, right? It's not necessarily what I do. I prefer to have things in the icon view generally, so I can hover over each video and just scrub through and see what each video looks like. Or it's not uncommon that in my workspaces, if I'm using all panels and the project is starting to get bigger, I will just list all my items. And it's worth noting that once you go into a particular bin, you can go back to viewing all your bins by hitting the return button up here on the left of the project panel. And there we go. We're back into our view of all the bins. It's always good to stay organized, because on much larger projects, you will be dealing with multiple files, and sometimes you can get lost in the chaos of your project panel. With that being said, I believe we have some familiarization now with the user interface of our editing software. We understand different panels. We understand how we can change the orientation of things. And we also understand that organization is key when first starting a project. Let's now move over into the more interesting stuff and start creating our first sequence. Talk about your project timeline and sequences. So at this moment, we have our organized files in the project panel. Next to the project panel, you'll find the timeline. Now there's multiple ways to create a sequence. Let's start with the most common way by going to File, New Sequence. Now, when you do this, you're greeted by a new sequence box, which again can be full of information that's quite scary for a beginner. Do not worry if you do not actually know what camera is being used by your client, or perhaps you're unaware of the aspect ratio or the footage FPS, all things we will discuss in a different module. What I recommend strongly here is going with digital SLR and 1080p 30. You could change the name of your sequence here at the bottom. What I tend to commonly do is ignore this entire tab, hit settings, and this is where I'd actually play around with my sequence settings. Again, as I've mentioned previously, I'm more of a default guy. It allows me to be more versatile in different editing situations. So the only thing I'd actually play around with is the frame size. So currently I've got this set at 1920 by 1080, which is a 16:9 aspect ratio. And this is one of the most universal formats being used for YouTube, Rumble, and horizontal videos. Of course, there are other formats you might need to get familiar with. So for example, 1080 by 1080. This is a 1:1 ratio, commonly used for Instagram squares or on your Instagram feed. And then for example, you can have 1080 by 1920, which is the 9:16 aspect ratio. So I'm just going to quickly click OK here so you have an understanding of what I'm talking about. You can see on the program panel, we now have a vertical video commonly used for TikTok, Instagram Reels. So I'm just going to close that sequence and then delete this from the project panel. And I'm going to show you another way of creating a sequence. In my video bin, I have multiple video files, and let's just say your client has sent you video clips, or you have video clips from different cameras, different settings, different scenes. What I do is find the video clip that is going to be the core narrative of your sequence. And for me, it's actually this one down here, which is TRW Promo 4. And what you basically can do is drag this video clip over to this icon here and let go, and you'll get a new sequence. Now, the settings of this sequence will be the same settings as the video itself. To check this, you can go over to sequence, hit sequence settings. Again, you're greeted by the sequence setting display, and here you can see the frame size 1920 by 1080, 16:9, which is cool. So hit OK. So over in the project panel, you can see a sequence has been created just above the video that you selected. So I'm going to drag this sequence up and into my sequence bin, minimize the video bin, open the sequence bin, and I'll just quickly change this to TRW Tay Add, which is also reflected over here on your timeline. So that's another way to set up your timeline. But for me, it's really simple. I genuinely just hit File, New, Sequence. I have a preset selected, which is usually DSLR 1080p 30, and then in the settings, I will always make sure it's 1920 by 1080 if you're editing long form content. So for the sequence name, I will just put TRW Tay Add, and then I'll hit OK. And I've got a new sequence with a blank timeline. Now, geez, you may not necessarily be editing horizontal videos. You may be editing square videos, maybe editing vertical videos. Go online and find out what the aspect ratio for those videos are. Let me just quickly come back over to the sequence settings. You need to understand what the pixels are for that aspect ratio, and then just insert them in the frame size. Majority of you will either be working with horizontal videos, which is 1920 by 1080, times it by 2 to get a 4K video, or you might be doing vertical videos, so shorts. You just basically want to switch the numbers around, so it's 1080p by 1920, and you're good to go. Okay, geez, let's hop into the next video where we will look at the timeline and start building this ad. So before we jump into the lesson in regards to the timeline, I just want to give a quick rundown of everything we've gone through and the way that the project is currently set. As you know, we currently have 2 projects open. Over here in the project panel, you can see I've labeled the project that we are working with as CC TRW Tay Add, and then the original Tay Add is here and it's labeled TRW Tay Add. You can also see this reflected into the timeline as I have both of the sequences open. So here in the TRW Tay Add, as you can see, it's quite messy, so we organize the files, and this is the sequence that I've got in one of the timelines. Similar story for our CC project. Here is the sequence, which is also in our timeline panel. So the timeline panel itself is where we will spend majority of our time. And just to kick things off, I'm going to drag a video onto this CC timeline. So over in the project panel, I'm going to change my view to the icon view, check out some of the videos and see what we can drop into our timeline. I'm going to select this punching bag yacht wide video, and what I'll do is just drag and drop it onto our timeline. Premiere Pro has given me a clip mismatch warning. Basically what this is telling me is the sequence settings that I currently have do not match the video, which is fine. I'm comfortable with the sequence setting that I've got, which is 1920 by 1080. So I'm going to keep existing settings. So as you can see in the program panel, the video clip is smaller. So what I'm going to do just very quickly is click on the clip in the timeline, and then over on the left hand side in the effects control under video, there is motion. So I'll just scale this up. And as you can see in the program panel, I'm scaling the video to fit. And not to worry if all that confused you, we will be going into effects controls, motion, opacity, and all those type of things later down the line. I just wanted to get the video in a nice position as we talk through the timeline. Now, the best way for me to explain this timeline is to go back into our original ad, and I want to focus purely on this timeline itself. The timeline is separated into two areas. You have video at the top, which you can see there is this divider in between. I've mentioned it in one of the previous lessons. And beneath this divider, you have all your audio tracks. So audio 1, audio 2, 3, 4, and so on. And same above the divider, video 1, video 2, 3, and 4. We also have this slide or zoom function, which allows you to get right into the detail of your timeline or zoom out. You also have the same on your right hand side, which you can increase the size of each of the tracks or reduce the size for both audio and video. I'm just going to quickly press shift and minus, which will reduce all the tracks. And I'll just quickly set this up in a way where we can zoom and look at the timeline in much more detail. So you can see I'm dragging this up. So the timeline is taking most of the space within my project. And believe it or not, majority of the times when I'm editing, the program panel where you can see your video or edit is usually very small because majority of the focus is down here within the timeline. So here you can see our timeline. It looks really condensed. This is not the way I would normally edit. And what you can do is change the size of each track. On the left hand side within each track, you can basically double click. And as you can see, I'm expanding each of the tracks. Me personally, when editing, I want my tracks as expanded as possible so I can see generally what edits and what cuts I am making within the video clips that I've uploaded into the timeline. So in order to expand all of them out, I'm going to press shift and plus and boom. And there you have it. I have every single track expanded, and you can start to notice within the video tracks, I tend to have thumbnails at the start of the video. This just allows me to see the video better. Again, this is all to aid me in seeing the cuts that I'm making within each of the video clips I've added to the timeline. You can change this by using the wrench icon within the timeline display. If you click it, again, you are met with multiple options. Here you can see minimize all tracks, expand all tracks. And if I was to just uncheck show video thumbnails, they've all gone. I wouldn't recommend this. However, you might need to do this if your project is running slow. Running the thumbnails within your editing software can sometimes take up a lot of RAM. So if you've got a solid editing PC or an iMac, I recommend having the video thumbnails on. And of course, I recommend you go through these settings and have a play around and see what works best for you. I'm just going to zoom out and I'm going to quickly arrange some of this. So I've got adjustment layers. We will go into this a bit later on. I don't necessarily need those expanded. For me personally, when I'm editing, it's the video clips themselves that I need expanded, and having the ability to see the video clips is really good. And just before we move on to the audio tracks, it's worth noting that within each video track, there is a set of functions. So if I didn't want to see any of the videos on this particular track, which is video track 2, I can hit the toggle track output on and off. I also have the ability to lock tracks. So if I just zoom in on this particular track here, which is video track 5, and I hit the lock button, you can see you get these etched lines over your video, which essentially means this track is locked. So if I want to try and move this video, I wouldn't be able to. However, on the rest of the tracks, I can easily move the videos. So sometimes that can come in handy, especially when you're dealing with big projects. Being able to lock particular tracks allows you to move certain areas of your project without affecting other areas. Now, down on the audio tracks, it's a very similar story. I tend to like seeing as much of the audio as possible. And as you get better, you'll start to realize when you're editing certain clips, you're actually editing through audio rather than video, because an expanded audio track allows you to see the waveform of the track. Therefore, you can see where there's gaps. So there would have been a gap here. I've made a cut. Perhaps I could have made a cut here. You can see a little blip in the voice. But overall, you'll find as you get better at content creation, most of your post-production is actually done through audio, which is why I'll always say audio is king. Now, within your audio tracks, you also have the ability to mute particular tracks. So if I hit M or mute track here on audio 2, that means everything on this timeline will be muted. And you can do this across different tracks. But a quick tip, a lot lot of people tend to forget is I've seen a lot of editors actually go through the length of muting every single track just to listen to one particular track. So let's just say I only wanted to hear Andrew Tate's voiceover. The best way to go about doing this is rather than clicking mute on every single track, you can just simply hit solo track, which is the S next to the M. If you click this, then when playing back your edit, you will only be able to hear the solo track that you've clicked. And that's just a little cool tip to keep in mind. You can also add on solo tracks. So let's just say I only wanted to listen to audio track 2 and 3 as well as 1. There you have it. When I play this back, I'll only be able to hear the sound for those 3 particular tracks. So you're probably wondering, what's the need for multiple tracks? Well, if we head back over to our CC sequence here in the top left of the timeline panel, you can see we've got this one clip which consists of 1 video track and 1 audio track. If we wanted to add another video into our timeline, back over in our project panel, let's just say I pull this clip on. You can see I can add this on top of another clip, or I can add it onto the same video track to follow along. But what this allows us to do is layer clips on top of each other. Let me just quickly expand these tracks out. So as you can see, we've got this clip of Andrew Tate punching a heavy bag on the yacht, and because I've layered another clip on top, it automatically changes into that particular clip. With that being said, I actually need to go ahead and readjust this clip. So I'll click it, head back into the left hand program panel, and in the effects control, just increase the scale once again. Don't be overwhelmed by this function. It's something I will go into in detail later. And one last function I want to show you on the timeline is if you go onto an empty track, right click, you can add a track or you can delete a track. I use these quite commonly. Most people just go ahead and drag clips on and stack the tracks. But I think sometimes it's better just to add the track and then bring the clip over. It allows you a bit more control. That's just more down to preference. But there you have it, the essentials you need to know in regards to the timeline panel.